Hello, welcome to Zigmatech Learning Hub. I'll be your instructor for civic education. For this class, we are going to be taking our exercises from the ExamGuide app. If you don't have the application already installed in your device, I want you to download the app in order to follow along in this class. ExamGuide is a leading educational app that helps students prepare adequately for various exams like UTME, post-UTME, WEAC, GCE, KCPE, IJMB, JUPEB, Calvipedia, BESE, SSCE, NCEE, NECO, etc. You can download the app from www.examguide.com or Google Play Store. Please subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell to be updated on new videos. Ready for today's class? Okay, let's get started. Today we're going to discuss the privileges that you are born with, naturally endowed with, and these are human rights. So the topic today is on human rights. Specifically, by the end of this lesson, you should be able to state meaning of human right, that is, define what human rights is. Then identify the characteristics of human rights, classify human rights according to the categories of human rights, that is, the types of human rights. Then discuss the limitations to human rights, those factors that limit human rights. Then discuss how to promote human rights. Now, these are the things we are going to look at in this lesson. Now, let's start with the meaning of human rights. What we refer to as human rights. Human rights are those inalienable privileges, freedoms, and entitlements that every individual is meant to enjoy as human. So there are those natural entitlements, privileges, liberties that everybody must enjoy simply because we are human beings. So they are not peculiar to a particular set of people or persons or accorded to anybody because the person is from a particular race or particular class, but they are entitlements and freedoms people have simply because they are human beings. And because they are very necessary for effective living as human persons. Now, we also define human rights as the claims and the privileges inherent in man and cannot be denied unless through legal means. When we say claims, we're talking about those privileges that you can enforce. That's the government of your country has the responsibility to make sure that these privileges are protected, and you can call for redress or seek justice when these claims are denied. It's like you buying something, you have paid for a particular thing. Now it is your claim to take possession of what you have paid for. It becomes your right. As a child in your house, you have different privileges that are entitled to members of that family. Example, it is your privilege to be sheltered by that family. It is your privilege to be fed by the family, the education, even to inherit properties belonging to family, bear the name of the family. These things are privileges that you have as a member of a particular family. Now, as a human person, you have privileges, liberties, freedoms that we refer to as human rights. So when we say human rights, there are terms that we use to describe them. One, privileges, freedoms, entitlements, claims, and liberties that you have as humans. Now, let's look at these rights. Examples of human rights. One is right to life. It is your right to be alive, and nobody should take your life from you except by legal means. Now, the second one is right to dignity of human person. Now, which means that at all times you should be treated with respect. You should be treated with respect. Then we have right to personal liberty. That's personal freedom. Exercise your personal freedom, but that does not mean that you interfere with other people's freedom. We have right to fair hearing. At all points, no matter the accusation that is brought upon you, even if the whole world saw you when you committed an offense, it is your right to be heard. That is why in the law court, no matter what you've done, they will ask you guilty or not guilty. And of course, there must be process of interrogation. So you must be heard. Then you have right to private and family life. Everybody is entitled to that privacy. Establish a family and groom a family of his or her own. They have right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. That's free thinking. Think the way you like. Conscience, the way you justify actions or whatever happens. And the religion, you can belong to any religion of your choice. We also have rights to freedom of movement. Freedom of movement, you can go and settle anywhere you like. You can live in any part of your country and also any part of the world, provided you meet the necessary requirements required for you to live there or stay there. Then we also have right to freedom from discrimination. You should not be treated based on recourse to where you come from, recourse to your ethnicity, recourse to your religion, recourse to your race. We have right to ownership of property. You have the right to own movable and immovable property, any part of your country or even in the world, provided you follow the legal means or procedures. We also have right to freedom of expression and the press. That freedom of speech. You can express yourself, your thoughts, what you want, your own ideas. You have the right to express. You have the right to peaceful assembly and association. That is, you can form any legal peaceful group. That is, we are not saying that you should form an illegal group. It must be a peaceful one, a legal one that can be permitted by the country. Also, we have the right to freedom from slavery, torture, and the forced labor. Nobody should subject you to slavery, to torture. Even the law enforcement agencies do not have the right to torture you for any reason. Then even forced labor, making you to do something by force, you have the right to freedom from such. Now, let's look at the characteristics of human rights for a better understanding of human rights. Now, 1, human rights are inalienable. What we mean by inalienability of human rights? It means that they cannot be unduly taken away from you, except recourse to legal means. There must be a legal procedure and means of denying you your right if it is necessary. So, the inalienable cannot be taken away unduly from you. 2, human rights are indivisible and interrelated. What we mean by indivisibility of human right is that one right, you can't detach one right from the other right. When we say freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, it is dependent on right to life. You must be alive to talk about freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. You can't separate these rights. They are all interrelated. All of them must go together. So you can't deny this right and say you're keeping the other one. All of them are interrelated. That is what we mean by they are indivisible. You cannot separate them. They are all connected to the other. Then we have human rights are universal. It means that anywhere you find yourself in the world, you are entitled to these fundamental human rights. It's your entitlement anywhere you find yourself around the world, any part of your country, you are entitled to them. Then human rights are inherent in the sense that you are born with them, they are natural, they are part of you. Also, human rights are legal in the sense that they are recognized by law. Most countries, their laws recognize these rights and they must be respected as such. So they are established by law. That is why you have many countries that have human rights in their constitution. Then human rights are constrained by law. The same law that establishes human rights also places restraints or limitations to these rights, which we are going to discuss later. The human rights are determined by citizenship. Now, there are rights that citizens can enjoy. Non-citizens cannot enjoy those rights in a particular country. So there are rights that if you are a Nigerian, it's entitled to you as Nigerians. Foreigners cannot enjoy these rights. Now, human rights are also embodiments of liberties and freedoms. They are about our liberties, our freedoms that we must enjoy. So if you look at this, we say freedom of this, freedom of thought, freedom of movement, right to ownership of property. So all of them are embodiment of liberties and freedoms. Then human rights are enforceable. That's, they can be enforced. Example, if people want to deny your right, of course we have enforcement agency that will sit and the court to see to the enforcement of your right. So you can make claims on it. That is a must, that this your right must be respected and protected. So because they are legal, we must enforce them. So these are the main characteristics of human rights. Now we go on to look at the categories of human rights, the different types of human rights. So these rights, we can separate them into different types. Now, number one is what we call civil rights. Now, in our screen, we can see the leader of civil rights movement in the United States of America. Now, when we talk about civil rights, of course, we are talking about fundamental human rights and privilege that everyone is equally entitled to, irrespective of ethnicity, nationality, status, and the gender. So they are the rights that everybody must enjoy. It does not depend on citizenship. It does not depend on anything. Wherever you find yourself, irrespective of your ethnic group, your nationality, that's the country you are coming from, your status, that is your class, whether you're of the upper class or the lower class, your gender, your religion, these rights are natural rights that everybody is equally entitled to. The person on the screen, you can guess, Martin Luther King Jr. So he's a renowned person in leading the advocacy on civil rights movement in the United States of America. Now, let's look at examples of civil rights. Of course, we say that they are the fundamental human right, natural rights. One, it's right to life, and everybody is entitled. We have right to dignity of human person, our right to ownership of property. We have right to personal liberty. We have right to family and private life. We have right to fair hearing. So everybody is entitled to this right. We have more. It's not limited to these ones. These are just some of the examples. We have more of them. Everybody is entitled to this right, irrespective of where you are coming from, who you are, what you are, and your status. Now, let's look at another type of right, political and civic rights. Now, we call them citizenship rights. Now, these are freedoms and liberties citizens have to participate in political and governmental affairs of their state. Now, these are the rights that only citizens can enjoy. Only citizens. So it's not everybody that can enjoy these rights. Only citizens are entitled to enjoy these fundamental freedoms. So foreigners may not enjoy this right. Now let's look at examples of political and civic rights. One is what we call right to vote and be voted for, which we call franchise. So it's only citizens of a country that have the right to vote and be voted for, right to vote during election, voted for to contest for an elective position, right to peaceful assembly, which can lead to formation and joining political parties in a country, right to freedom of expression and the press, right to fair hearing. They all fall under civic and political rights, though some of them are still civil rights. Now, let's look at another type of human right, economic right. Now, economic right refers to the rights that enable one to engage in meaningful economic activities to survive and find meaningful or fulfillment as a member of a society. So these are rights that can enable people to engage in meaningful economic activities. That's right that permit you to make living, to earn living as a person. Now, examples of economic right: one, right to own property. Of course, people own property from which they make money. People invest in properties. Also, we have right to work. It is your right to work is an economic right to find any engagement, any occupation from which you earn your living. I have right to belong to trade unions. Now, these are what we call workers' association. Association that are formed by a particular group of workers from which they can make claims on their right or make their demand from either the employee or the government. We have right to freedom of movement. It's part of economic rights, and that is why you see many people are not living where they are in their place of origin. Rather, you see them living in one country or the other, or in their country they are living in a place different from their own. It's part of the enjoyment of economic right, right to freedom of movement. Then we also have right to fair wage. Now, when you work, it is your right that you should be paid what should be at least fair to you and your employer. We also have what we call social rights. Now, man is a social animal. Man finds fulfillment in relating with other members of the society, and they cannot be alone. Now, these are rights that enable people to meet their social needs and promote people's relations with others. They are also referred to as rights that protect us in our relations with other people. Now, examples of this right: one, right to education. Of course, education promotes your relations with other people. It's a social right. Right to freedom of worship and religion. That is right to join any religion, organization, or form your own if you don't have, or if you're not interested with the existing ones. It's a social right. Right to social security is a social right. Then right to freedom of peaceful assembly and association, to join any particular group or association that is legal and are judged to be peaceful in the society, is a social right. Right to movement falls under social right. Right to work is under social right, because in working you will be relating with people. Of course, in working you talk about employer and employee relation, or you're providing services that customers will come and pay for this service. So in any way, you must be working with people. Then right to freedom of expression. Of course, when you express yourself, when you make your speech, of course, you're making a communication to one person or the other. This also falls under social rights. We also have legal rights. Now, legal rights are those rights that are provided and protected by the law, and they are enforceable in case of violation. Now, legal rights, if you want to know legal rights, if you look at the laws, the Constitution, the rights there are legal because they are enforceable. Also, if you look at what we call Labor Act, that talks about also the rights of laborers, the workers, they are legal rights. All those rights that are provided by the law and enforceable in case of violation. And when you are going to seek redress in the law court in case of violation, of course, you will be you make reference to those laws that provide or establish these rights. So most of the rights we talked about, provided they are found in the established laws of the country, they are referred to as legal rights. Now, let's look at what we call limitations to human rights. Of course, human rights are not absolute. We say that your right stops where another person's right, starts. So there are factors under which human rights can be denied. Now let's look at some of them. One is detention. When a person is detained by a law enforcement agency for any reason, at that point of detention, it could be for interrogation, it could be for investigation, it could be that a person is a suspect. It could be in the course of enforcing emergency period or emergency situation in the country or state of emergency in the country. Now, when a person is detained, that period of time, the person cannot enjoy a right to movement. Now, when the government declares curfew, that is, they can say no movement from this time to this time. At times we hear dusk to dusk curfew. At times we hear 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., which restricts movement of people. Now, when we have this, human rights, right to movement is denied. And of course, people can be arrested for enjoying their right to freedom of movement at this period. Now, when the government declares state of emergency, in order to address a tension on the state, it could be breakdown or breakout of a particular disease. It could be during serious security situation in a country. The government can declare state of emergency. And when you see state of emergency, you can have lockdown, curfew declared by the government. The government can make some place a restricted area, no movement, nobody should go there. Now, when you have this, human rights are denied legally, and you cannot go to law court to challenge such denial of human rights. You can't enforce it at this period of emergency. Also, during emergency, the government can use the military law enforcement agency, where you have you have people being arrested, you have people that their houses will be searched. So when you have the situations, human rights are denied. During environmental cleanliness or sanitation, like in Nigeria, every last Saturday of the month, and environmental sanitation is being observed. Freedom of movement is legally restricted, and people can be arrested for violating such law. So when you have such law in place, of course, human rights are denied. When a person is convicted by the law court, found guilty of committing a crime by the law court, and is sentenced, the person committed to prison, of course, you can't talk about your rights there. Though there are rights that should be accorded to you if you're in prison, but you will lose many fundamental human rights. Execution of court sentence can deny human rights. When the law court declares that a person should be executed, that somebody who has been found guilty, case of murder, and a person is declared to be executed by the law court, you can't talk about human rights here. The person's right to life will be denied. Poverty can deny people their rights. Do you want to understand? Now, we say that these human rights are claimed, they are enforceable. Now, you have the right to go to court to seek justice for your right being denied. And in case, if you want to go to court, who do you meet? You can't go personally to court. You must go through a lawyer, and that lawyer will charge you service fee, which a poor man may not be able to pay. So in this case, the poor man may be limited in enforcing his or her own rights. And that is why people say that God fights for the rights of the poor man, because the person may be helpless to enforce his rights. Now, we also have illiteracy and ignorance as a limitation to human rights. When people don't know their rights, they are not knowledgeable about their rights, of course, their rights can be denied without them standing to defend their own rights. Age can serve as a limit to human rights. How? Franchise that we talked about, the right to vote and be voted for, depends on age. In many countries, you must be up to 18 years before you can vote. Even to be voted for depends on the age that's allotted to that electoral office. The office of president has a particular age limit. You must be up to that age before you can contest. The governorship, it has its own. So age is a serious limitation to human rights. Even the right to drive, you must be up to a particular age before you can drive. Now, being a public servant, their kind of work can limit your right. Example, a public servant cannot join a political party unless the person resigns. So, and of course, cannot disclose the government secrets to the public. So, you see, this kind of work limits the right of this person. Now, still on limitations to human rights, development projects by the government can limit human rights. I give you an instance. The government has the right to declare that they want to construct road in a particular place, carry out a development project which will affect your property in that area. In so many cases, you go for compensation, but you cannot stop the government if the government has declared that they want to erect or carry out a particular project in a particular area. If your property is there, it will be affected. You can't stop the government. Highest, you can go for compensation. That's what the government will do for you. But remember, if you have your building, your government has already marked that your property can go without you getting compensation. So when government wants to carry out development project, it can affect your right to ownership of property. Also, during police investigation, example, they can come to search your house with search warrant. Now, when they provide that, they have the right to go every area of your house and search. And that affects your right to personal liberty. Also, law of libel, slander, and sedition affects human rights. How? When we say libel, we're talking about a written statement that defames the character of a particular person, and that written statement is usually false. Also, slander is an oral statement that defames the character of a person. Now, sedition is when you make written or oral statement that incite the citizens to revolt against their government. Now, the law prohibits you from all this. And when you are compared or constrained by the law of libel, slander, and sedition, your freedom of speech is limited because you cannot express up to this point. If you commit libel, slander, or sedition in the course of expressing yourself, legally, you can be tried. And if you're found guilty, you face the penalty. Then contagious disease. When somebody has a contagious disease that can spread, that person will be quarantined, that is isolated. And when the person is isolated, the person's right of movement is denied. Of course, remember COVID-19. What happened to so many people? People were quarantined, isolated. So their freedom of movement was denied. Also, insanity. When somebody is insane, the person can be confined to psychiatric home and the person's freedom of movement denied. Negative traditions can also affect people's rights. It could be tradition that allow people to be betrothed to a particular person when they are born. Without your consent, you have been betrothed to a particular man or woman for marriage. Then when you grow, they tell you, no, this is the person you must marry. That affects your right to privacy and family life. There are other negative traditions. The traditions that say that, okay, women will not drive in some places. So many of them affect human rights. Even rights that says you cannot kill a totem, sacred animal of a particular place. These are negative traditions that limit human rights. Now, the type of government is a limitation to human rights. When you have autocratic government like military rule, where you cannot express yourself, criticize the government, it affects your rights. Then, when you have restriction of some areas for public safety by the government that says this place, nobody can go there for public safety. If you have that, it's a limitation to movement. Now, let's look at how we can protect human rights, because it's very necessary that human rights are protected. Number one is enshrinement of human rights in the Constitution. That is, human rights should be made part of the provisions of the Constitution of a country, so that violation of human rights will be treated as violation of the fundamental law of the land, and people can easily recourse to their rights and reference it in case of violation. Also, there should be civic education. What we are doing now, civic education should be taught in school, where we expose learners, students, pupils to their fundamental human rights, so that they will know it from childhood and also be able to defend their right when violated. There should be impartial and independent judiciary. That is, a judicial arm of government that is not under the influence and control of any other organ or arm of government and not influenced by anybody. There should be press freedom. There shouldn't be any form of censorship of the press, so that people can actually enjoy their right to freedom. Rule of law should be practiced. That's the supremacy of law over everybody, both the rulers and the ruled. Of course, these human rights are embedded in the law. Remember, we said that we have legal rights, so that if we have the rule of law, where the laws are treated as the supreme authority, human rights, of course, will be respected. Then there should be adequate publicity of the laws. That people should know the laws of the land, so that they cannot, in the course of violating the law, violate human rights. There should be efficient and effective police system. The police should be effective and not violate people's rights, and be ready to arrest people that have violated other people's rights without fear or favor. There should be separation of powers and checks and balances in order to check autocracy in government. Then there should be respect for international laws and conventions, especially the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which we are going to discuss later. There should be respect for all these conventions that have bearing on human rights by countries of the world. Also, there should be establishment of human rights organizations. Human rights organizations should be established to help to enlighten people about their rights and help to protect people's rights. There should be mass education. People should have knowledge, have their basic education, which will help them to know their rights. Also, there should be poverty alleviation measures to help to reduce poverty in the country. You know, we mentioned poverty as one of the limitations to human rights. So when we have poverty reduced, now human rights can better be protected. Now, thank you very much. These are the packages we have about human rights. We are taking you to the practice session of our package of our app, where we can make some practices. Now, we are going to our exam guide, SSCE, Civic Education. So this is how it works. You click the subject. I've clicked Civic Education. Then I select at random the year. Now, I will select the topic of interest. I select Universal Declaration of Fundamental Human Rights. Then I have human rights selected, fundamental human rights. Now we are going to look at questions dealing with what we have discussed. Now, which of the following conditions give rise to denial of rights to life? Now let me take it from D. Burglary. That is when you break into another person's property without permission. Of course, of course, can be sentenced, but your right to life will not be taken. If you protest, it's rights. It's the right of citizens to protest against government policies. Forgery is a crime, but it's not enough to deny you your right to life. Now, if you commit homicide, that is taking another person's life, You can lose your own life if you're found guilty. The court can sentence the person to death. Now, let's look at this story. Dr. Faji was the Minister of Works and Urban Development in Ghanaian Republic. As such, he was entrusted with public funds so that his ministry could construct new roads and rehabilitate the existing ones. Unfortunately, Dr. Faji embezzled the money entrusted in his care and siphoned same to his foreign accounts. This led to the deplorable conditions of roads and the Republic. The Crime Commission arrested and prosecuted him accordingly. Subsequently, he was given the opportunity to be defended by lawyers of his choice in a court of law. However, he was found guilty and sentenced to 15 years imprisonment with hard labor without the option of a fine. In addition, he forfeited all his ill-gotten wealth to the Republic. Dr. Faji cannot exercise some basic rights because he, A, was a suspect in a criminal case, B, was found guilty of a criminal case, C, failed to comply with court order, D, embezzled public fund. Now, he cannot exercise basic right, as we say, was found guilty of a criminal case. It's not A, was a suspect. Suspect has rights. It's as innocent as any other person. Now, failed to comply with court order. We didn't hear that he failed to comply to court order. We didn't read that and it wasn't established. Embezzled public fund. You can now determine that if you find him guilty. So B is the answer. Now, all human beings are born free, equal, and dignity. Now, we are going to look at this in our next class. Human rights are described as inviolable mainly because they are A, authoritative declaration, B, enforceable everywhere, C, not to be unnecessarily taken away, D, legal declaration instrument. Yes, not to be unnecessarily taken away. That is inalienability of human rights. Now, from that story we read, based on the above story, which of the following would Dr. Faji not be allowed to do while in prison? Of course, prisoners, they don't vote during election. They can participate in prison fellowship. At times, trainings can be given to prisoners where they write exam at the end. He can engage in hard labor, of course. He cannot vote. He can't come out to vote. Now look at this question. Fundamental human rights are literally the rights that one can enjoy because one is A, an individual, B, a human being. We mentioned it. These are rights you enjoy simply because you are human, not for any other purpose. It's not as a citizen. That is when a citizen is when you talk about civic or political rights. It's not because you are an educated elite. It's not because but because you are a human being. Thank you for participating in today's class. You can practice more questions using the ExamGuide app. The app scores and gives a detailed explanation of all questions at the end of your practice tests. You can learn a particular topic of interest with different modes like study mode, mark mode, and the practice mode. It also has other features that make learning fun. It is a must for all serious students. Download from www.examguide.com if you don't have it yet. See you in the next class. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and share the videos to people that benefit from it. Bye.